Videotape number 3, time is 3:19.
Doctor, in 1957, after this memorandum was received by you, what did you do with the information in it concerning asbestos in a cigarette filter?
Objection.
I don't remember the memorandum, so I can't quite remember what I did about it.
Well, Doctor, the information contained in this memorandum...
Please give me a paragraph.
Sure. The bottom of page 2, the top of page 3. The paragraph that begins at the bottom of page 2 and over to the top of page 3.
Well, Mr. Pasternak is stating his opinion of a visit to the Sloan Kettering Institute and a discussion with Dr. Weiner.
Well,
what do you wish to know?
What I wish to know, Doctor, is that as the technical director of H&V Specialties, which had been marketing an asbestos-containing cigarette filter, wasn't it shocking to you that Dr. Winder believed that asbestos, when used in a filter, could dust off and enter the lungs?
Objection.
He doesn't quite say that, but he might infer it.
Well, wouldn't even such an inference be a matter of great concern to you?
Objection.
How can I answer that question when I can't place myself back all those years to remember even that I got this?
So you remember nothing about this memorandum?
I remember absolutely nothing.
Well, Doctor, if this memorandum was kept in the usual course of business at Hollingsworth and Vose, having been addressed to you, once you read it, what would you have done with it?
Objection.
Objection.
What would you have done with the paper?
Same objection.
I can't answer what I would have done with it. I normally would have the secretary file it, I guess.
Then it'd be filed under memorandum that had gone to you. Isn't that right?
Objection.
Yes, indeed.
Well, Doctor, I want you to understand something that maybe you don't appreciate. This memorandum, this particular memorandum, unlike many of the other exhibits I've shown you, was provided to me by Hollingsworth and Vose.
Objection. Counsel, what is the point of that?
So, Doctor, isn't it
I'd like
fair
to renew my
assume-
request that
No,
you sit down.
please
Well, I
don't
do interrupt. When
me.
you get up and start lecturing to the witness, it's inappropriate.
I am not lecturing the
You,
witness,
of course you
counsel.
are.
Please don't interrupt and try to obstruct my questioning.
No, it's not the questions, counsel. It's the speeches and the lectures to the witness that I object to.
Doctor, if I tell you that this particular document came from Hollingsworth and Vose and was provided to me at my request, wouldn't it be logical to assume that it came out of your files?
Objection. Counsel, are you really looking for an answer to that question?
Yes, I really am.
Okay. Did you look at the check mark beside the name A.K. Nicholson?
Well, you know, counsel, that's very interesting. But I really don't think you should try to coach the witness on what to answer.
No, I'm trying to coach the witness. I'm trying to prevent you from badgering the witness.
I am absolutely not badgering the witness. Would you please answer my question, Dr. Knudson?
Would you read the question back, please?
Do you understand the question, Dr. Knudson?
I understand the question.
Would you answer it, please?
It is not necessarily logical that it would have come from my file,
Why is that?
because there are four other people that were copied on this.
That's right. They were copied on it, but the memo itself was directed to you. Isn't that right?
I'll object to your
Objection.
argument.
That is correct.
So it would be a logical assumption that the original of this memorandum would be found in your file. Isn't that right?
Objection.
You may consider it logical. I think it's logical that it could be at any of those other addressees.
Even though they were indicated as receiving carbon copies and you were indicated as the person to whom it was being sent.
Objection.
Exactly.
Your answer is exactly?
Yes.
Now, Doctor, at the time that you first conceived of the micronite filter media for which you received a patent, there were other substances such as nylon, cellulose acetate, viscose rayon, and polyester fibers that could have been used to achieve the same purpose. Isn't that right?
There were such fibers, but not commercially available.
Well, before you created the filter media using blue asbestos for Kent, that wasn't commercially available, was it?
Objection. Counsel.
The media
Yes.
was not commercially available, correct.
It was an experimental project that you worked on and perfected, isn't that right?
I'd prefer to call it developmental.
And during the period 52 to 56, the other synthetic fibers were available in experimental quantities, isn't that right?
The only source that I know of was the Naval Research Laboratory, who had an experimental facility for making microfibers.
Doctor, if someone like Lorillard indicated a commercial desire to sell billions of cigarettes containing this kind of fiber, there would have been a way for American business to satisfy that need. Isn't that right?
Objection.
That's
Counsel,
your opinion.
Counsel, please don't argue.
It wouldn't be your opinion.
I didn't say
Objection.
that.
Well, would it be your opinion?
I don't know.
But in your patent, you stated that other such fibers, such as rayon, cellulose acetate, nylon, and polyester, would be equally suitable. Isn't that right?
It's approximately correct.
Now, Doctor, in your direct examination, you talked about the sense of responsibility that you felt when you were an employee of the United States government. When you discovered that there was a problem of anchoring asbestos in 1954, did you feel a sense of responsibility to the public?
Objection.
I don't remember what I felt 40 years ago.
But you knew that you felt a sense of responsibility 50 years ago when you worked for the government, according to your direct testimony, right?
That was indelible in my mind, yes.
The sense of responsibility you felt when you were making cigarette filter media is not so indelible. Is that what you're telling us?
I don't remember, yes.
And in 1954, did you feel a sense of urgency to do something about the problem of anchoring asbestos in the filter media?
Objection.
Well, here again, you're asking me what I remember. I don't remember whether to the extent to which you're making reference.
So you don't remember a sense of urgency, is that right?
Objection. That's not what he said, counsel. You know it's not what he said, and please refrain from trying to mischaracterize and mislead the witness.
Doctor, I want it to be absolutely clear to the jury what you mean.
I don't remember.
Okay, so you don't you don't have a recollection one way or another of a sense of urgency.
I don't remember.
Objection.
Fine. Doctor, let's stay on 1954 for 1 second, Doctor. You first got involved with Lorillard producing the Kent filter media as a developmental project in about 1951, isn't that right?
Approximately.
And when the cigarettes came out commercially in 1952, you started smoking Kent cigarettes, isn't that right?
Not immediately. Sometime after that.
Well, I believe you've testified that you started smoking at the onset of your relationship with Kent. And that would be 52, isn't that right?
It could be. I don't remember.
Had you ever smoked cigarettes before you started smoking Kents?
I did not.
So you took up smoking at age 40, is that right?
Approximately.
And you quit smoking 2 to 3 years after that, isn't that right?
Approximately correct.
And that would have been in late 1954 or early 1955. Isn't that correct, Doctor?
Approximately.
And am I correct that it's your position that the reason you decided to stop smoking is you decided you didn't like smoking?
That is what my answer was, yes.
Well, you didn't like the taste, Doctor?
I didn't like the effect of the taste in my mouth, that's correct.
Well, Doctor, after the first month of smoking Kent cigarettes, did you like the taste of the cigarettes in your mouth?
I can't characterize my reaction to that extent. I don't know.
Can you characterize your reaction after 2 months or 6 months or 12 months?
I don't think I ever really enjoyed smoking anything.
But by the end of 1954, with all the information you were receiving from Lorillard about the passage of asbestos through the filter into the smoke, you had another very good reason to stop smoking, didn't you, Doctor?
Objection.
I believe that had no bearing on the matter.
It was just coincidental that you happened to stop smoking at about that same time. Is that what your testimony is today?
Objection.
Yes.
Doctor, before you testified on direct examination on Wednesday, you had a number of meetings with counsel for Lorillard and counsel for Hollingsworth and Bose. Isn't that right?
Yes.
And in fact, you're being represented here today by counsel for Hollingsworth and Bose. Isn't that right?
Correct.
And according to my notes, there were, before your direct examination, there were approximately 4 meetings, 4 or 5 meetings, lasting a total of about 15 hours. Does that sound right?
I haven't added up the hours. Could be something approximately that.
And at each of those 4 or 5 meetings, there were 3 attorneys present. Isn't that right?
I can't quite remember that for sure.
There was always more than one attorney, wasn't there?
I believe that's the case.
And the first meeting that you had on the subject of this deposition with those attorneys was either in January or February of this year. Is that right?
I believe that's correct.
And did those attorneys ever show you the letters from Dr. Parmalee to Dr. Fulham about asbestos coming through the filter and the tests that Dr. Fulham was conducting?
Objection.
You're talking about the photomicrograph report?
Yes.
Sometime during that interval, yes.
But did they ever show you your own letter in response to that document?
Objection.
I don't know. I don't remember.
Well, Doctor, I'll represent to you that yesterday afternoon, it was near the very end of the session, when I showed you that letter in response to Dr. Parmalee's letter, you testified that it was the first time you'd ever seen it since it was written.
Objection.
Do you choose to stand by that testimony?
Objection.
Yes, you're misleading me now.
Oh, I don't intend to, Doctor. You
Okay.
tell me what it is that you think that I'm misleading you about, and I will
Counsel,
correct
please.
You are interrupting the witness.
you. Did you wish to finish, Doctor?
I don't quite understand what you're driving at.
Well, Doctor,
The,
did you wish to finish, Doctor?
no, I won't elaborate.
All right. Doctor, Would you please look at Exhibit 8? P8.
Yes.
Now, if you turn it to the side, Doctor, that bears a stamped number on it of 00420-680, doesn't it?
Yes.
All right. Now, did you ever see that letter before yesterday afternoon?
Objection.
Except, of course, when you wrote it.
Excuse me if I just refresh myself here.
Oh, please go ahead, Doctor.
Now I'm running for the question.
Doctor, the question is, isn't it a fact that except for when you wrote this letter some 36 years ago, you have never seen that letter before when I showed it to you yesterday afternoon?
I believe that to be true.
And that this was not one of the letters that was showed to you by counsel for Lorillard and Hollingsworth and Bose?
Objection.
I believe that's true.
And so your direct testimony, during your direct testimony, you did not have the benefit of a review of this letter. Isn't that correct?
That's correct.
Now, Doctor, would you look at Plaintiff's 10, which we've just been talking about, which is the trip report regarding Dr. Ernst Winder? Do you have that handy, Doctor?
I do.
Doctor, my question to you is simply this. Before I showed you that document this morning, when's the last time you saw it?
This document 10?
Yes, P10.
Objection.
Well, not recently.
It certainly was. I'm
Years
sorry?
Years ago.
It certainly wasn't shown to you by counsel for Lorillard or H&B as in preparation for this deposition. Is that right?
That's correct.
Objection.
And you certainly did not have the benefit of that memoranda when you provided your direct testimony to the jury on Wednesday. Isn't that right?
Objection.
That would appear correct.
Doctor, with respect to P11, would you just take a look at that for a moment? Because I'm going to ask you the same questions about that. P11.
May I have a continuing objection, counsel?
Absolutely, counsel.
Thank you.
What's the question, sir?
With regard to P11, sir, which is your letter to Dr. Parmalee, did you ever see this letter before I showed it to you during the course of this deposition?
I did not.
So you did not have the benefit of this letter when you testified on direct examination, is that right?
I believe that to be true.
And with respect to letters 13 through 16, which are the letters from Dr. Parmalee to Dr. Fulham, do you remember that group of letters?
Do I have it here?
I believe you do.
13, 14, 15, all right?
Those letters I put together because they all are from the same, they're all between the same two people, Dr. Parmalee and Dr. Fulham. Is that fair to say?
That is correct.
Objection.
Okay. Now, Doctor, those 4 letters which I've showed you today during this deposition, have you ever seen those letters before today?
I don't recall ever having seen them, no.
So you did not have the benefit of those letters before you gave your direct examination, is that right?
That would be correct.
Doctor, on Wednesday, during your direct examination, you gave an expert opinion to a reasonable scientific certainty, isn't that right?
I remember that.
Well, Doctor, when you were preparing to present testimony on direct examination, did you request that Hollingsworth and Vose provide you with your files and correspondence from the period of time when the asbestos filter media was being sold by Specialties to Lorillard?
Objection. Counsel, I think you're seeking to invade the attorney-client privilege.
I made no such request.
Did you take any steps whatsoever to acquire information from that period in the 1950s before you testified on Wednesday on direct examination?
I made no such preparation.
Did you ask for any information that Lorillard might have on the subject of asbestos passing through the Kent filter cigarette?
I did not.
Did you request that your secretary obtain whatever records might still exist at Lorillard that date from that period on your behalf?
I did not.
Counsel.
Your secretary, the secretary you had during one period of time during your employment at Hollingsworth and Vose is still with us, isn't that right?
No.
She's now deceased?
No, she lives in California.
All right. But the point is that other than what the attorneys chose to show you, you yourself made no efforts to refresh your memory of this period. Isn't that right?
That is correct.
Wouldn't that account in part for your absence of memory on certain of the questions I have asked you, Doctor?
Objection.
Well, I didn't know there was any requirement that I go back into history and try to re-advise myself. I've done my best to recall my memory as the occasion arises.
Well, Doctor, when you were sworn on direct examination, you took an oath to tell the truth, and also you took an oath to tell the whole truth. Do you recall that, Doctor?
I do.
Objection. Counsel, are you calling the witness a liar? Is that the point of this?
I am impeaching your witness. You know perfectly well what I am doing.
Yeah, that's what I think you're doing, is trying to call the witness a liar. If you are, why don't you be direct about it?
And if the shoe fits, he will have to wear it.
Objection.
Oh, counsel, please. Why don't you sit down and ask a proper question?
I will be happy to ask a proper question, counsel, if you will allow me to do so without interrupting. Doctor, do you feel, would you have been better able to live up to the oath to tell the whole truth if you had reviewed the documents that were sent to you and that you sent out on these issues during the 1950s?
Objection. Counsel, the witness is not going to be permitted to answer such an outrageous question.
Do you believe that you're instructing the witness not to answer?
That's correct. You ask a proper question. Don't insult this gentleman any longer.
I will advise you, counsel, that I do not believe you are permitted to do that. And I would respectfully ask that you reconsider.
Ask your next question, counsel.
I wish to be clear on what your position, counsel. Are you instructing this witness not to answer and during a de bene essay deposition for use at trial?
That's correct.
Doctor, would it have helped you remember what actually happened back in the 1950s when you were working for specialties if you had gotten documents from both Lorillard and Hollingsworth and Vose from that period on the subjects in which you testified on direct examination?
Objection, counsel.
I believe you can answer, Doctor.
I really can't answer that question. I don't know what that might have accomplished.
The point is that other than this one, which indeed he did see,
Doctor,
the rest of these are goddamn.
if you were asked today to design a test to test whether a Kent cigarette with the blue asbestos filter media in it was allowing asbestos fiber to escape in the smoke, would you know how to do it today?
Well, I'd have to consult some reference books, I'm sure, to get the latest technique.
But as you sit here today, having been asked questions about the micronite filter, the asbestos filter media, you're not able to explain how to do that today. Is that correct?
Objection.
Not with today's technology, I said.
Well, Doctor, isn't it a fact that if a cigarette company came to you today and told you that they intended to use your invention with the blue asbestos as a cigarette filter media today in 1981, that you would have no reservations about telling them to go right ahead and sell it to the public?
Objection.
That's too hypothetical.
Didn't you testify this morning in response to that question that you would have no reservations about advising a cigarette company to go ahead and use your invention with blue asbestos?
Well, why don't you use that reply?
Excuse me?
Why don't you use that reply?
What reply?
The one that you just referenced to me.
Off the video record so that the court reporter can find the answer in his notes, since it was this morning.
I don't understand.
Yes, the school.
Off the record.
We're back on the record. Time is 3:54.
Question now, is there any reason why, if a cigarette company approached you today and indicated that they wished to use your invention in a cigarette in 1991, you would try to persuade them not to do it? There was an objection. The question was read back. Mr. McElhaney said, apart from the fact that he has a signed patent, Mr. Johnson asked the question, apart from the fact that you had a signed patent. Answer, well, that's a pretty hypothetical question. Question, well, do your best, doctor. Answer, I would have no reservation.
Doctor, now we've had the deposition testimony that you gave this morning read back. Do you stand by that answer that you would have no reservations about having your invention used today on a cigarette filter, on a cigarette as the filter?
Objection.
I assume it might be modified. That I meant to imply I would have no reservation about working with another cigarette company.
You did not mean to imply that you had no reservations about using blue asbestos in a cigarette filter media?
Objection.
I didn't say that.
Well, would you have reservations about using blue asbestos in a cigarette filter media in 1991?
Not for the reason that you're inferring.
Not for reasons of health?
Yes.
You would have, just so I'm clear as to your answer, doctor, because of the negatives, you would not be concerned about the possible health implications of using blue asbestos as part of a cigarette filter media in 1991?
I would wish to confirm that there was no migration in the fiber.
And if there was migration of fiber, you would never want blue asbestos to be used in a cigarette filter. Isn't that right?
That's a fair statement.
Because it would be potentially deadly.
Objection.
I didn't say that.
Well, why wouldn't you, Doctor?
Objection.
Because I choose not to.
Because of your personal preference or for some other reason, Doctor?
I can't give you an answer.
No further questions, Doctor.
Dr. Knudson, as you may recall, my name is Nathan Shockman. I have some questions for you as well. Dr.
Mr. Shockman, could you identify the parties you represent?
That's right. I'd be glad to. I think I told you this morning when I had a chance to question you, Dr. Knudson, that I represent Owens, Illinois, and the Keene Corporation in the Simsack case and the Greif case.
Mr. Shockman, would you mind being seated during your examination?
I certainly would. It is not our custom at all, and I would mind it.
I object.
You can have a continuing objection to my standing. Dr. Knudson, in the course of answering questions posed to you by Mr. Johnson that dealt with events in your life in the 1950s, particularly about 1954, you had some trouble recalling some of the events. Is that right?
I believe it is.
And during the direct examination posed to you by Mr. McElhaney on Wednesday, you were asked about events in your life from the 1920s, the 1930s, the 1940s, and the 1950s, and you did not once answer any of those questions with "I don't remember" or "I can't recall."
Objection.
Is that right?
Objection.
I don't recall that specifically, no.
You don't recall that from Wednesday?
Objection.
That all the answers were, I don't remember.
Well, sir, you were asked about an event, and I believe this was not on the video for the members of the jury, but just in the course of our asking questions about your background, about the press conference given at the Waldorf Astoria, where there was an announcement to the public and the press about the Kent micronite filter cigarette. Do you recall that?
Yes.
Objection.
And you were able to remember the names first and last of 6 Hollingsworth & Bose employees who were present in that room that day. Is that right?
Objection. Counsel, that's not what the testimony was. If you're not going to use a transcript, you better get the questions and answers right, because that is unfair. It's also plainly wrong.
Excuse me. Was it 5 employees and 1 lawyer for Hollingsworth & Bose?
Counsel, there is a proper method of using a prior statement, and this isn't it.
And there's a proper way of making an objection and not making a speech. If you want to state that it's a misleading question, fine. 1 word, that's all it takes. Dr. Knudson, isn't it true that you were able to remember the names, first and last, of the Hollingsworth & Bose employees that were present in the room during a 1-day event at the Waldorf Astoria, which event was designed to promote the Kent filter cigarette?
Objection.
I remembered some names. There were other names, I believe, that I failed to remember.
And isn't it true you were able to remember the names of 6 people?
Objection. Counsel, we just did that.
Fine.
Oh, I didn't count them. You may have counted them.
Doctor, let me ask you something about the experimental filters. Do you recall the correspondence and reports about experimental cigarettes with experimental filters?
Objection. Can you reference
With the
a specific
microscopist?
correspondence?
Yeah, I believe it was in exhibit number 13, P13, that was placed before you.
What's the question?
Well, can you tell us today how these filter media and the filters differed from the run-of-the-mill production Kent cigarette filters?
I cannot, since I had no part in this.
Well, can you tell us whether the people who were coming up with these experimental filters were trying to create a filter
It was 13.
that... Were they trying to create a filter deliberately that shed asbestos, blue asbestos fiber?
Objection.
Was that their intent?
I really don't know. I wasn't a part of this. I wasn't even aware that it was going on.
Doctor, you made some comments about Dr. Fulham's technique. I think Dr. Fulham is visiting us. Do you recall making some comments on Dr. Fulham's technique that you were not sure about the validity of his technique?
Objection.
I recall making some comments, yes.
Now, sir, you're not an electron microscopist, is that right?
Exactly.
And you're not an expert in electron microscopy, is that right?
Correct.
And you're really not in a position to comment one way or another on the validity of another person's electron microscopic technique.
I was talking about the preparation of the sample.
I'm talking now about electron microscopic technique. You're not in a position to comment on that, are you?
Objection. It was asked and answered, counsel.
You may answer.
As far as the electron microscopy, I am not familiar with that at all.
No.
And I'm not qualified to comment on that particular aspect.
Now, one thing you are is a chemist. You're an analytical chemist. Is that right?
Correct.
You have a PhD, and you belong to professional societies, and you've received professional journals in the area of chemistry throughout your adult life. Is that right?
Correct.
And as you sit here today, you can give the members of the jury the chemical formula of crucidolite.
We're back on the record. Time is 4:05.
I'll re-ask the question. You have the objection. Doctor, as you sit here today, you can't tell the members of the jury that you know the chemical formula of crucidolite.
Only in a general way, yes.
And you can't tell them whether it's hydroxylated or a hydrated silicate. Is that right?
Yes.
And other than chrysotile and crucidolite, the blue asbestos, you can't describe, you can't name, rather, the other commercially useful forms of asbestos minerals. Is that right?
That is correct.
And you can't tell this jury how chrysotile is morphologically different from crucidolite. Is that right?
I believe I made reference to the fact that the blue tended to be finer in diameter than the Bolivian, the African finer than the Bolivian.
So between the different kinds of blue asbestos from different localities, you know that African blue asbestos has finer fibers, narrower fibers than that which comes from Bolivia. Is that right?
Tended to have.
All right. But as far as the difference between chrysotile and crucidolite, you can't describe the morphological differences between those fibers. Is that right?
Not accurately.
And when you were speaking of asbestos during the course of the direct examination and Mr. Johnson's cross-examination, in terms of what was being used in the gas mask filter media and the Kent cigarette filter media, you were talking about blue asbestos. Is that right?
That is correct.
Now, the first, as I understand it, your testimony, the first awareness you had of blue asbestos and its filtering properties was when Mr. Horace Lee of the Arthur Little Research Center discovered that blue asbestos was the critical ingredient in Nazi gas masks. Is that right?
That's correct.
And that was the result of this urgent project that you and other men were conducting at the Naval Research Laboratory?
It was one of the objectives, yes.
And as I understand your testimony, you came to understand that blue asbestos somehow helped to keep the gas mask unclogged during events where there were smoke screens
The filter media, yes.
Now, is it your understanding that the gas masks with the blue asbestos, the ones that were used by the Nazis, didn't have the problem because of the crucidolite?
That was one of the assumptions, yes.
And it was your view prior to Lee's finding that the crucidolite and Nazi gas masks, that the Allies did not have crucidolite in their gas masks and the Nazis did?
Objection.
Before Lee's finding?
The American forces, yes.
Well, isn't it a fact, sir, that in September 1940 the British were making gas mask filters with crucidolite in Nottingham?
I'm not aware of that.
Isn't it a fact in the late 1930s that in towns of Leland and Blackburn in Lancashire, the British were using blue asbestos to make gas mask filter products?
I'm not aware of that.
Isn't it a fact that in the late 1930s, the Canadians in Ottawa were using blue asbestos to make gas mask filters?
I was not aware of that.
In the course of this urgent project, did you ever consult with any of the Canadian gas mask producers?
I did not personally know.
Now, you understand that crucidolite is a very fine, in terms of diameter, very narrow fiber. Is that right?
Quite narrow, yes.
Less than a micron in diameter?
Yes.
And just so we're clear, we're talking about a mineral fiber that occurs naturally in the earth. Is that right?
Not necessarily in Europe, but Africa and Bolivia.
In certain parts of the world, certain geological formations, you can find blue asbestos.
Yes.
And it's not a man-made substance. Is that
That's
right?
correct.
And it's a fiber because the particles are longer than it's wide. Is that right?
I don't understand the question.
The individual pieces of the mineral, the individual crystals, are called fibers because they're longer than they are wide. Is that right?
That is correct.
But it was the diameter of the blue asbestos, the African blue asbestos, that was so small that made it useful as a filter media. Is that right?
I believe that to be true.
And the diameter had to be about 0.3 microns. Is that right?
No, it had to be within a range, hopefully less than 1 micron.
But the length of the fiber was not particularly important in terms of the efficiency of the filter media. Is that right?
I believe that to be the case.
So there's no reason that the diameter could have been smaller than 0.5 micro or 0.3 microns, and the length of the fiber could have been no more than a micron. Is that right?
Objection.
That's speculative. I don't know.
If you pulverized the blue asbestos particles to 1 micron lengths with the appropriate diameter of less than a micron, wouldn't that blue asbestos still be just as effective in your filter that the filter media that you developed for Lorillard?
I don't know, never having done it.
Can you think of any reason why it wouldn't be?
Objection.
And you said before that the diameter is the critical dimension. Is that right?
I believe that to be true.
Now, am I correct that when I had a chance to ask you questions before, you didn't know the length of the fibers, the blue asbestos fibers, in the filter media that was made by Hollingsworth and Both Specialties?
Objection.
Is that right?
I don't remember any effort of trying to determine the length.
Now, today, 1991, you are aware that blue asbestos is regarded as a cause of mesothelioma.
I guess I don't know that particularly.
Well, are you aware that there has been an epidemiologic study conducted on the men who worked at Hollingsworth and Both Specialty plants, published as a feature article in the New England Journal of Medicine?
Objection.
I did not know that.
Do you know how many employees at Hollingsworth and Both have died of mesothelioma?
Objection.
I do not know that.
Now, I understand that you have published one article in your lifetime that was a peer-reviewed article. Is that right?
Yes.
And that was basically a spin-off of your doctoral thesis. Is that right?
If you choose to call it that, yes.
Did the article basically contain the substance of your research that you used to gain your doctoral thesis?
Part of the information.
And that was published, the article that is, in 1941, is that right?
Approximately.
And you have not published anything since then in a technical or scientific journal, is that right?
That's correct.
And you have not published anything on Brownian motion, is that right?
That is correct.
And you haven't published anything on small particle physics, is that right?
That is correct.
And you haven't published anything on small particle mechanics, is that right?
Apart from the patent, you mean?
Published in a technical journal or a peer-reviewed scientific journal, yes.
Then that would be correct.
And you haven't published anything on electromagnetic or electric and magnetic forces exerted between small particles.
That's correct.
And you really don't consider yourself an expert, do you, on small particle physics or mechanics? Is that right?
Objection.
I didn't quite say that, but I
Well, isn't it true?
asked the question again.
Well, isn't it true that you don't really consider yourself to be an expert on small particle physics or small particle mechanics?
Objection.
Would you care to say what you consider expert?
Doctor, I will defer to your understanding of that English word.
I take it that the counsel has declined to clarify the question.
Doctor, do you understand what an expert in a scientific or technical field is?
You know, counsel, I think he
I'll ask
asked you to
another
clarify
question.
it.
Do you understand what an expert in a scientific or technical field is?
Objection.
I don't believe I could articulate it right here off the cuff.
Could you, by way of definition, but could you point us, or the members of this jury, to any expert in the whole field of small particle physics or small particle mechanics?
Objection. Counsel, isn't an expert a legal conclusion?
I don't have anybody in mind.
Can you point us to a single learned treatise or standard textbook in the field of small particle mechanics or small particle physics?
I don't have that information available to me.
Now, you gave an opinion about the fibers coming out or not coming out of the back end of a Kent micronite filter cigarette. Is that right?
I believe I did.
And you gave that opinion without any experimental verification whatsoever. Is that right?
I believe I had lots of experience that bore on the subject, so I don't think you can say it without any verification.
Well, I didn't say any verification. I said any experimental verification.
Counsel, please don't bicker with the witness like that.
I'm not bickering.
You are too. That wasn't even a question. You can't make statements like
Stop
that.
speechifying, Mr. McAvoy.
Don't tell me what to do, counsel.
You've been telling everyone else what to do. I'm just returning the favor, sir.
Well, I'm unable to answer that question.
As you sit here today, you don't even know when you first formulated the opinion about whether fibers don't come out the back end of a Kent filter cigarette. Is that right?
I don't have a specific date, no.
And as I believe you've told me before, it could have been within the last few weeks that you first formulated this opinion.
Objection.
If you have that opinion, that's wrong.
Well, sir,
If I made a statement to that, I misunderstood the question, or I didn't, or I misstated myself.
well, can you be more precise then about when you first formulated this opinion?
Many years ago.
Sir, isn't it true that before you came here on Wednesday to give that opinion, you did not consult with anybody you would consider to be an expert in the field of small particle physics or small particle mechanics about the opinion?
Objection.
Is that right?
Objection.
I believe I'm entitled to an opinion without consulting somebody.
Isn't it true that you didn't consult with any literature, any scientific, technical, professional literature in preparation for giving that opinion?
That is true.
And doctor, isn't it true that without a literature review and without experimental verification of the opinion, you could not get that opinion published in a peer-reviewed scientific journal?
Objection.
I'm not sure, but I doubt it.
You doubt that you could get it published? so-
Exactly.
Now, you've taught in your lifetime chemistry and physics, college and high school students.
Yes.
And as you sit here today, can you explain to us, to the jury, how a scientist goes from a hypothesis to a theory to an established fact?
Objection.
Objection.
I don't wish to undertake that explanation.
And is it because you just don't feel like it or because you can't?
Well, because it would involve doing, more than I can do here at the moment.
Can you explain to us what the scientific method is?
I don't believe I can.
Sir, isn't it a fact that experimental verification is the very essence of scientific method?
It's one of them.
Objection.
Yes.
I want to talk a little bit about what does come through the filter. Talk about its characteristics. You don't know what the temperature of the gases, vapors,
Objection
fumes-
and motion to strike.
Sir, is it your understanding that something comes through the filter end of a Kent cigarette?
Yes.
And isn't it a fact that you don't know what the temperature of the gases and vapors and particulates that come through the smoker's end of a Kent filter cigarette?
I don't know exactly, yes.
And you don't know what the temperature is at the site of the burn, do you?
I do not.
And you don't know what the temperature is at the site of the far end of the filter away from the smoker's mouth, do you?
I do not.
Oh, here. Dr. Knudson, during the course of some of my questions, I thought you said that you were unaware that blue asbestos used in the H&V plants could cause mesothelioma. Did I hear you correctly?
Objection.
Are you talking about now or during the 50s?
Your knowledge today.
Objection.
Well, I guess I don't know that.
Well, sir, let me show you the testimony from the discovery deposition at page 135, line 17, where you were asked, could that impairment include asbestosis? And you were being asked about the hazards to the specialty workers. And your answer was, it could, at line 23. And then you were asked again at line 24, could that impairment include mesothelioma? And your answer on page 136, line 2, was it could. Now, sir, those were truthful answers, were they not?
Objection.
Yes. Yes.
Sir, you've admitted that there was a problem with the draw for the Kent filter cigarette, micronite filter cigarette, is that right?
At one point, yes.
And the draw was considered high, is that right?
I'm sorry, Counsel, did you say high?
High, I mean hard.
Hard?
Hard.
Yes.
And is it true that if the draw is hard, the efficiency of the filter is great?
There is a corollary. It isn't direct.
And the utility of this filter cigarette, of the filter rather, the media and the filter itself, that you developed, is in its ability to remove toxic particulates, fumes, and gases from the smoke coming off a cigarette. Is that right?
Objection.
In selective sizes, yes.
And isn't it true that if the draw is hard, the smoker will have to work harder by sucking harder to get those fumes, vapors, gases, and particulates that are the source of his pleasure?
Objection.
Isn't
It
that
might
right?
be marginally higher, yes.
And, sir, isn't it true that if blue asbestos came through the filter, that the hard draw of this filter cigarette could be the source of his death?
I didn't hear the last of it.
The source of his death.
Objection.
Source of what?
His death.
I don't know that.
That's all I have.
Let's take about 5 minutes.
Off the video record?
We're back on the record. Time is 4:39.
Doctor, we have no questions. We all wish to thank you very much for your efforts over the last 3 days.
Thank you very much, Doctor.
You're welcome.
Off the video?
Off video.